So true.
January 23rd, we have a quorum. And first, we will go to approval of the minutes from yesterday's meeting. Are there any comments, questions, or corrections?
Actually approve their minutes.
Seeing nothing, they will stand approved as presented. Then, we will turn to Senate File 255. Welcome, Senator Abeler. Please begin when you're ready.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's always a pleasure to come before the Tax Committee, however rare my opportunities may be, to be here. And I thank you for your attention to the needs of the state. I was shocked when I was chatting with my commanders up in Anoka that they had to pay property tax on the Legion and the VFWs. And I'm like, what? How can that be? I said, well, write me a bill. Oh, there's been many bills. Well, here's another one, and I think maybe this is the year for it, Mr. Chair. And this bill simply, Senate File 255, simply exempts the Legions and the VFWs from paying property tax. And I was thinking, well, why could we not have done that before? And I discovered there is a cost, $50,000, because the Legions don't get the benefit of the property tax refund, and then now those who do pay would be having to incur that. It would generate close to $1 million in savings for the Legions, $900,000 according to the revenue note, and then ongoing, and especially when they're challenged with the pull tab issues, and there's such a backbone of the community where they allow veterans to feel the brotherhood and sisterhood of their peers, and doing so many good things for their communities, which you all know. I mean, you're the choir, and so I think if there was room, you all could co-author this. So with that, Mr. Chair, I have a testifier, and then we can stand for questions. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much, Senator. Our first testifier is Christy Janigo.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Very good. From the American Legion Department of Minnesota. Welcome to the committee, and please identify yourself for the record.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I'm Dr. Christy Janigo. I'm the American Legion Department of Minnesota Legislative Chair. So greeting Chair and members. Last year in the House, Representative Wiens and his impressive slate of 13 bipartisan authors had the same bill, which received much support. We do hope this is the year where congressionally chartered veteran service organizations will finally see the elimination of property taxes for their buildings, and we're counting on you. I have in attendance with me Josh Fowler, the operations manager at Arcade Phelan American Legion Post 577 in St. Paul, a post which has struggled with its property tax burden. It has faced setbacks with the condition of its building covered in the Star Tribune and Pioneer Press, and is at risk of losing its building. I also have with me Lori Allert, the commander of Anoka American Legion Post 102. Last year, the Anoka Post paid nearly $15,000 in property taxes. Nearby posts Champlin and Ham Lake have turned in their charters, and the Anoka Post has been experiencing increased requests for financial support from neighboring suburbs. Post 102's ability to serve these increasing needs is limited by its tax burden. Many 501c3 nonprofit organizations receive property tax exemptions after qualifying through their county assessor. Veteran service organizations have other designations such as 501c4 and 501c19. We're asking for access to the same nonprofit property tax exemptions provided to 501c3 nonprofits. Congressionally chartered veteran service organizations have a federal requirement of reporting their volunteer and charitable efforts directly to Congress annually. And because of that accountability, it makes sense for them to pay no property taxes. There are a handful of states that provide the same benefit as a recognition of the good that veteran service organizations do for their communities, and we'd like to see Minnesota among them. A zero tax measure would clear up much of the confusion county assessors across our 87 Minnesota counties have regarding post taxes. This does drive workload at the county level and inefficiencies that are inevitably covered by taxpayers. People make assumptions about our buildings that they are just bars or restaurants or places to gamble. That is absolutely false. So much more happens in our buildings. We have our post meetings there where our membership decides which local organizations to donate proceeds from charitable gambling. In this manner, we prop up small local nonprofits providing important community services, including youth sports, addressing food insecurity and homelessness, not just for veterans, but the entire population. and funding public safety equipment for our cities, such as fire trucks. These are important gaps filled that federal, state, and local government simply cannot address. Our posts in Minnesota are increasingly diverse, as veterans seek places of refuge where they can relax in the camaraderie of like-minded people who have shared experiences. Veterans tend to be slow to trust other people, and that can lead to isolation. We do need social connection as much as other people do, perhaps more, because many do not understand what some of us have been through protecting this country and its freedoms. We hold veteran suicide prevention training with VA partners so that people recognize the signs of suicidal ideation and know how to get some help. Our halls are places where people gather for birthday parties, celebrations of life, and weddings. In small towns, our posts are the only option for such gatherings. Post homes can be important meeting places. For my day job, I'm an assistant county veteran service officer, and I've met homeless veterans to counsel them on housing programs, walk the anxious spouse of a veteran through the application to our state veterans homes, or met veterans to discuss federal VA benefits claims at American Legion posts. The American Legion Department of Minnesota has a total of 531 posts, but more than half of our posts already do not have buildings. 260 of our posts have buildings. Of course, several are struggling and at risk of closing in the future. The communities of Stillwater, Marshall, Northfield, Waite Park, Coon Rapids, and a number of them in the metro area have all had to sell their buildings to survive in the recent past. How many more communities will need to lose the gathering center for charity fundraising and activities before relief is provided? Thank you for hearing this bill.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Senator Abeler, any further comments?
Well, and thank you, Mr. Chair, and maybe I'll take your silence as everybody's like, well, yeah. And I kind of think that would be the answer to this. Well, yeah, and if you needed any more testimony, I could gin up within 30 seconds 4 more testifiers, and if you give us 10 minutes notice, we get 50 more people in here. It is a big deal. If they were all healthy and whole and they were still all over the state, then this wouldn't matter. But Coon Rapids lost one. She gave a list, and many are at risk. And veteran suicide is it's still too many, 20 a day or something like that. And part of keeping people connected is a way to guard against that. We went to a place in Anoka for a housing opportunity, and everybody's committed to it. You're like, oh yeah, we want to do that. So just kindly, if we could get this to go, I think this would be a good example of collaboration and the area of total agreement that could show Minnesota that, we in government do understand what's going on, and we're here to make a difference, and we're here to find what we agree on. This is certainly one of those things. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator, and you are right. Many of our districts have lost chapters of our Legion and or VFW and their facilities. And so thank you for bringing the bill, and to your testifier and your fellow members, thank you for your service. With that, excuse me, Senator Dibble.
Sorry, I wasn't going to speak, but I got inspired. I just wanted to express support. I have the Valentine Post in my district. There's just a great article in the newspaper about it, if you caught it. And it serves as the missions that was described, but very, very much a community center, a community hub, serves the wider community, and there's a lot of goodwill in my district and in the neighborhood that I live in for the Valentine Post on Lindale. So this is a great bill. Thank you, Senator Abeler.
Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Abeler, thank you for bringing this bill. It's a great bill. Actually, I have a similar one from previous years and one this year. I just want to commend you on your testifiers. Absolutely excellent testimony, and it's wonderful to see you all here. This has a very nominal cost, almost, I would say. Fiscal analysts will maybe analyze that just a tad differently, but this is so important. It's so important to our communities, and so I just want to thank you for bringing this bill and your wonderful testifiers too. I'm highly supportive.
Senator Putnam.
Similarly, Senator Abeler, I want to thank you and all the folks who came here to testify on this behalf, because your existence here is testimony, even though you weren't talking like Christy was. So thanks everyone for being here. My one critique, however, is that the bill is already full. I just looked it up. It's already got too many co-authors. So that's my one complaint, is the deep rage I feel towards you, Senator Abeler, for not having an opportunity for me to sign on. And this is me at my most rage-filled, by the way.
Very good. With that, members, Senate File 255 will be laid over for possible inclusion. Thank you all. Next, we will go to Senate File 30, Senator Nelson. Welcome, Senator, to your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a document that came in late last night, which is well identified. I'm wondering if the pages might be able to pass this out to the committee, and maybe we can get it added to our digital at some point. So, Mr. Chair and committee members, thank you so much for hearing Senate File 30 to tax veterans. On the committee, you will recognize this bill. We call it the estate tax portability bill. It was part of the 2022 Tax Conference Committee report, and it was also heard in our committee in 2023. So just to give you a little bit of background, under current law, Minnesota allows $3 million of a estate tax exemption. And just so you know, in our current law, the federal exemption for the estate tax is $13,999 per individual. In Minnesota, our limit is $3 million, and you'll see that on the document being handed out to you. In the case of married couples, the $3 million estate tax exemption for Minnesota applies for the purposes of calculating the taxable estate after the first deceased spouse. So in 2011, the federal government, the federal estate tax was modified to allow the second descendant spouse's estate, that would be the surviving spouse, to use the unused exclusion left over from the first descendant spouse's estate. My testifiers will give you some real-life examples about why that is so important. This bill, it's called portability of the unused exclusion. So the first spouse who dies, who doesn't use that full estate tax exclusion, can be ported over to the surviving spouse. Unfortunately, that portability is not available now under Minnesota law. The bill before you allows spouses to elect to transfer the amount of the deceased spouse's unused exclusion consistent with federal treatment. This modified subtraction would equal the excess in any of $3 million over the amount of the Minnesota taxable estate of the last deceased spouse up to $3 million. And the effective date is June 30th, 2025. That's just a brief explanation of the bill. Many of you are familiar with it. The memo in front of you, just for kind of your background on this committee, we always like that. The memo before you shows you the few states that have an estate tax that does not, well, that has an estate tax in general. And there's only about 13 of them, 12 others plus ours. And you can also see on that sheet the rates. And you will notice that there are only 4 other rates that have such a small exclusion from the estate tax. So we clearly are an outlier. So with that, I will turn it over to my testifiers, and then I'll be glad to walk through the bill.
Very good. Thank you, Senator. First, Todd Cook, welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself for the record.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Todd Koch. I am a member of the Minnesota CPAs and a recently retired partner of John A. Knutson and Company, a local CPA firm in Falcon Heights. I have been talking about this bill for a number of years. I'm very passionate about it because what all we're asking is, saying in English is, the order of death shouldn't matter. That's it. The order of death shouldn't matter. Why does that matter in certain circumstances? Well, let's talk about selfishly about myself. I'm as a small business owner, CPA firm. My wife can't own the CPA firm. So my financial assets were really three. My ownership in the business, my wife can't own that. My retirement account, my wife can't own that. And my house. My wife and I jointly own that. That's the way we bought it when we were first married, when we had no financial assets. So realistically, if I die first, my wife gets to use my exclusion and hers. If my wife would die first, all the assets are in my name, the joint asset moves to me, I didn't get to use any of my wife's. The order of death matters. And it's not because I'm selfish. It means she can't own my business and she can't own my retirement accounts. There's also times where people want to keep things in linear line. So I have a client that's got a family farm. The farm's been in the family for over a century. They want to keep the family farm going down the family lines. So the family farm is now in the boys' names. They had two boys. The boys are both married. Now, if their spouses would die first, that asset is not in their name, and they can't use the exclusion. If the boys die first, well, then they get to use the exclusion against the family farm. And the surviving spouse gets to use their own exclusion. The order of death matters in that circumstance. Why should the order of death modify the amount of tax collected? The third thing is most wills, because the federal exclusion is so high, it's almost $14 million. And because of portability on the federal level, you need more than almost $28 million for it to matter. So that means a lot of people don't worry about estate planning, right? I don't know about you, but I don't have no $28 million sitting around. Most people don't, so most people ignore estate planning. They forget about Minnesota. Because they forget about Minnesota, they just have what I call I love you wills. In fact, I'm dealing with one, a family friend died a few weeks ago. So I'm helping him deal with that right now. So Trish died just before Christmas. Their will is really simple. Trish says, I love you, Dick. Here's all my assets. You use them for as long as you're around, and then you distribute them as you should. That's why we call them I love you wills. So in that circumstance, it's easy, it's understandable, but it can be costly in the wrong situations. Because in an I love you will, here honey, take all my assets, the first person who died didn't use any of their exclusion. Now, when I look at the dollars included that this cost here, I could make most of this cost disappear. Not all, but most. If people would talk to me and pay me, I can make most of this cost disappear with proper planning, with trusts and all this kind of stuff that I really get into, all right? But why in the name of God should they have to pay me to get there? Why can't we come to the same answer by just allowing I love you wills to be good? Why can't we say, okay, spouse one, if you didn't use it, transfer that over to your surviving spouse, then they can have all the assets, they can use them as they thought fit, and then they can distribute them using both spouses' exclusions because the assets are really both the spouses. Let's let people make their plans simple. let's let the order of death not matter about the number of, about the tax we collect, and let's keep the costs down for taxpayers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Mr. Peterson, please identify yourself. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hunter Peterson, I'm the Public Policy Specialist at Minnesota Farm Bureau Federation. On behalf of our 31,000 family, farm, and ranch members, thanks for the opportunity to testify on Senate File 30, which provides for spousal portability for the estate tax exclusion. And I really appreciate Mr. Koch's example with the family farm. So I'm just going to kind of hammer on that point, I would say. Farmers face unique challenges when it comes to estate planning. Unlike many other industries, the wealth of family farms is tied up in illiquid assets such as land, equipment, and livestock. And as ag land values continue to rise, more family farms and ranches are wealthier on paper, increasing the chance that they will be subject to the estate tax. Estate tax portability will help family farms and ranches remain intact and continue operating without the financial strain of a large estate tax bill. I'd like to thank Senator Nelson for bringing the bill forward, as well as her co-authors, Senator Putnam and you, Mr. Chair. And I also like to thank you, Mr. Chair, for hearing the bill today.
Very good. Thank you. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and my testifiers, and yes to my co-sponsors, Senators Putnam and Senator Weber. Thank you so much. Just a brief thing. I don't want to take much of your time. I think many of you are aware of this need, and you are also understand that. I do want, as you look through the bill, I do want you to know that this bill also strikes obsolete language. So when you see the strikeouts, that is the obsolete language. Just briefly, I'll run through the bill for you. Section 1 just says that there's a return required, and it gets rid of all that obsolete language regarding the estate tax exclusion that phased in 2020 for purposes of filing the state tax return. Section 2 just requires that there be an election of portability. You must choose to elect that portability of the deceased spouse unused exclusion amounts, and also to note that that's irrevocable. And then it's deemed as an election if you file that. And then Section 3, it's not, when the estate tax is not required, the portability of the deceased spouse unused exemption, that is what it equals, the part that was not required. And then Section 3 is just the election of the portability of that deceased spouse unused exclusion, what it amounts to when the estate tax return is not required. So, and then Section 4, again, is just striking that obsolete language. So it's a small revenue estimate, Mr. Chair and members, about $300,000 in 2026, $1.6 million in 2027, and then it does move to 2.7 and 4.1 in the out years. I believe this is a matter of parity. First of all, as my testifiers have so well spoken. And I also want you to note the sheet that was handed out to you. We are an outlier, folks. There are only 12 other states that do have a state tax. All of them have lower rates, except for Hawaii, which has lower rates than us, and then also has a higher rate as well. But most of these, all of these states, except for Minnesota and Hawaii, have lower rates. I think that's important to know. And then if you look on that chart, you'll also look at the exclusion amounts. And you'll also note that 8 of those states have higher exclusionary amounts to start with. So folks, we are just a real outlier in this area. And I believe it's a matter of parity. It shouldn't matter which spouse dies first. Both should get that exemption. So I would ask for your favorable consideration on this, and thank you so much. So I'll stand for any questions.
Members, any questions? Senator Putnam, do you have anything for Mr. Peterson today as far as?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can make something up.
Very good. Hearing no questions, Senator Nelson, any final comments?
No, Mr. Chair, I think I gave all those final comments. I won't reiterate them, but I encourage your support, and thank you so much for hearing the bill, members.
Thank you, and with that, Senate File 30 will be laid over for possible inclusion. Next, Senate File 211, Senator Klein. Senator Klein, you have the A1 amendment as well.
Mr. Chair and members, thank you for hearing Senate File 211. I offer the A1 as an author's amendment, and after the vote, I can explain it.
Very good. All those in favor of the author's amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion's carried. Amendment is adopted. Senator Klein, to the amendment and your bill.
Chair Weber and committee, thank you for hearing Senate File 211. The A1 that you just voted on, so the Senate File 211 will deal with Foreign Service pension tax policy. And the A1 was a technical amendment so that we include retirees from the Foreign Service who retired before 1980. Members, if those retirees who retired at 62 in 1980 are still around, they are 107 years old, and good for them. We have included them in this bill. I don't know that they are. So thank you for voting on the A1. Members, the Foreign Service pension system is a federal pension system for retired Foreign Service officers who worked for the Department of State and were hired after 1984. These are the diplomats and other staff who work in our other nations away from their families and support our interests with diplomacy abroad. Its members qualify for Social Security. The pensions they earn for their civil service do not qualify for the Minnesota Public Pension Benefits subtraction, which we created in 2023. So their pensions are fully taxable. This new subtraction in Senate File 211 as amended would functionally put Foreign Service pension income in the same category as military pension income for Minnesotans, providing an additional subtraction for their pension income. The revenue estimate that we got on it last year said that it would cost $10,000. We have amended it to include those very elderly retirees, which I do not think will substantially change that revenue estimate. And Mr. Chair, I have a testifier.
Very good. Thank you, Senator. And we will then turn to your testifier, Mr. Olson. Please identify yourself for the record.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Carl Olson. I live in St. Louis Park, Minnesota, and I'm a retired Foreign Service officer. I describe myself as a second-generation Minnesotan. My late parents lived, worked, and studied in Minnesota in the 1950s. My mother was the county home agent in Pennington County from 1953 to 1957, and my father received his degree from the University of Minnesota in 1962. They left to pursue opportunities, and I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. They returned to Minnesota in 2018, and I moved here in 2021. I joined the Foreign Service in 1985 and served until 2016. I learned Spanish, Portuguese, French, German, and Pashto, and I served in more countries than I can count. I literally have no idea how many times I have moved. One of my specialties was consular affairs, which is visas and passports and helping American citizens in emergency situations. The other was political and military affairs, working with our military and the intersection of diplomacy, development, and defense. I served in Iraq at the military headquarters level and in Afghanistan at the provincial level. And so the bonds that are created in military deployment are very intense. I was 48 years old when I first deployed, and it changed my life. And I salute the veterans who were here earlier today. It's just an awesome experience. My experience is that the Foreign Service and the military, they're different, but there's a lot of overlap. We move around. You're moving around every couple of years, and it's a time-limited career. It's up or out. You can't stay in forever. But having retired, I've decided to make Minnesota my home. It's a good place to live, and I've gotten involved in my community. And I'd also like to thank the committee for Mr. Mark Jorgensen's testimony. He resides in Matamidi and is currently working in Vienna, Austria, and cannot be with us today. And I can answer your questions.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Members, any questions? Seeing none, I believe we heard this bill last year also. Is that correct, Senator Klein?
Mr. Chair, and yes, I should just add that it's estimated that this would cover about 30 Minnesotans.
Okay, very good. Any final comments, Senator?
No, sir.
With that then, Senate File 211 as amended will be laid over for possible inclusion. Thank you. Next, Senate File 132, Senator Putnam. I believe, Senator Putnam, you're going to get to say the word appurtenances again today, correct?
You can see the glee on my face, can't you?
Please proceed when ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I will acknowledge that as well, is that I'm sure that many of you have had this date circled on your calendar, and you've been looking forward to the opportunity to talk about appurtenances again with breathless anticipation. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for hearing this bill and giving us all the opportunity to think about the word appurtenance. I appreciate that a great deal. As excited as we might be, we can't really forget the word again. This is an issue that many folks have been working on for some time. It passed through this committee and survived the conference process, but it didn't pull through in the end. And this is our chance to actually fix it and finish it. Specifically, this is a very simple bill that will do significant good for Greater Minnesota. It does two things. First, it replaces the language attachments and appurtenances with systems not including substations or transmission or generation equipment. This change in the definition and the elements of power distribution are taxed. The change appears initially on lines 1.8 to 1.9 and is repeated at lines 1.14 and 1.15. Secondly, the bill establishes an effective date for this change on lines 1.11, 1.2, and again on lines 2.16. And Mr. Chair and members, I do want to acknowledge that there is still some work to be done on the effectiveness date. We had initially discussed the possibility of an amendment to change that, but at this point that doesn't seem prudent. We want to think about it a little bit more, talk about it a little bit more, and figure out what the effectiveness date will be. Now, I expect since the last time we talked, you spent a lot of time thinking about the word appurtenance and what it really means. And, I know I have. And so for edification and the knowledge of both people who are watching at home right now, the word appurtenance simply means something that is essential to the completion of an activity. So, for example, if you wanted to play football, a football would be an appurtenance to the game of football. Because if you're playing it with a golf ball, you're not playing football anymore. Does that make sense? No, so a football is an appurtenance to a football game. Taylor Swift is not essential to a football game. Taylor Swift is an impertinence, whereas a football is an appurtenance. Hopefully the analogy works. What we've been doing for years since 1939 is not taxing the entire football game and everything that makes it football. But for the last couple years, we've started to tax elements of the game that are essential for it to be a game. So for example, over the years, we've started picking out different elements and saying, well, it's still football, but we're gonna tax your pants or your cleats or the ball. When in reality, all of these elements are essential for this activity to be considered a football game. So what this bill does is it replaces this language of attachments and appurtenances, which, frankly, I'm emotionally torn about because I like seeing that word in law. But it replaces that with the entire system, so that the entire system is non-taxed and is protected because it's the entire system that actually delivers the power. So by changing to appurtenance to system, we simply simplify tax law and return to the intent of the original law. Ultimately, the effect of this alteration in language is to provide stability and consistency in our understanding of the taxation of the elements of power delivery for many of the power co-ops in our state. This will result in a little bit over a $700,000 property tax shift, but it will do a tremendous good. It is both rational and helpful for Greater Minnesota. Mr. Chair, thank you for consideration, and we have a couple testifiers to talk to you.
Very good, thank you. And first, we turn to Mr. Mike Henke of People's Energy Cooperative. Welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself for the record.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, Senator Chair Weber and members of the committee. Mike Hankey, I'm President and CEO of People's Energy Cooperative. We're a cooperative in southeast Minnesota. We're about 20,000 members that serves mostly rural areas around the city of Rochester. As a member-owned, not-for-profit cooperative, our mission is to bring affordable electricity to rural America, not make a profit. We collect only enough margin to cash flow the operation, and we return any excess margins to our members in the form of capital credits. Every dollar we spend or save directly impacts electricity in rural America, the cost of it. So let's go back to 2019. That was the first year we were assessed. We were assessed on the appurtenances to our distribution lines, despite a long-standing property exemption as Senator Putnam laid out. The resulting tax from that increase in the very first assessment was $200,000 to our small entity. That represented a 27% increase in tax to People's Energy Cooperative. The total assessments over the last 5 years have cumulatively reached nearly $1 million for our small organization. That pencils out to about $50 a member, which is almost $1 a month for our ratepayers, a cost that will continue without the legislative fix. The bill in front of you today seeks to reaffirm and clarify the property tax exemption of rural electric cooperatives that has remained unchanged in law since 1939 and needs updating to address the tax law, tax treatment of the new technology. The exemption was put in place to support electrification of rural homes and businesses over 80 years ago. At that time, the exemption was enacted. Nearly 90% of farms lacked electric power because of the prohibitive cost of delivering electricity to rural areas. This history is still relevant today as the cost to serve a rural cooperative member remains higher than urban areas. Minnesota's 44 electric cooperatives serve an average of 7 members per mile of line, and that compares to about 34 consumers per mile of line in investor-owned areas served by utilities like Xcel Energy. This longstanding property tax exemption must be maintained to ensure affordable electric service to rural Minnesotans. I want to express appreciation to the Department of Revenue for working with us to develop and support the updated language in front of you today, which clarifies that all parts of the rural electric distribution system are exempt from property tax. I also want to thank Senator Putnam for authoring the bill and Chairs Weber and Rest for quickly bringing this bill forward to put it on a path for early passage in session here. Quickly passing this bipartisan bill will result in holding down the cost of electricity for the 1.7 million households served by rural electric cooperatives in Minnesota. Thank you, and I'll address any questions.
Thank you, sir. Next, we have Ms. Bears, and welcome to the committee.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, for the record, my name is Joanna Bears. I'm the Legislative Director for the Department of Revenue. And like Senator Putnam, appurtenances is one of my favorite words too. So I appreciate the opportunity to testify on it. The administration would like to express its support on the language which updates the definition of attachments and appurtenances. This law has not been updated since 1939, but technology has, and it makes it very difficult to administer with the current language. We appreciate the many conversations we've had with the association and others to make sure this language is clear and it achieves the intent. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members, for letting me testify today, and I'll stand for any questions.
Very good, thank you. Members, any questions? I think it's Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for bringing the bill, Senator Putnam, and Mr. Hankey, thank you for coming up and testifying. Senator Putnam, if you would, again, there's a little bit of a hang-up on the effective date. Otherwise, everybody's happy with the language, and we just got to get this done. What's the prognosis on the effective date?
Senator Putnam?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Drazkowski. The prognosis is good. We just had some sort of new conversations about it just last night. So the issue is that we just haven't had a chance to chat yet, and I'm absolutely certain we'll be able to take care of it.
Thank you, Senator Putnam. Mr. Chair.
Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Putnam, thank you so much for bringing this bill. I appreciate the hard work that's happened on this over the years. I appreciate the department also understanding the need to update this language so that we are serving our people with today's needs, and the taxation reflects that. Thank you, Mr. Henke, for explaining so clearly why this is important. I do hope that we can get this as part of our conference committee report this year. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and just for the new member of our committee, quite frankly, this bill wouldn't have been necessary except for a department change 5 years ago. So there would not be a shifting, as we call it, without that change. So with that, any final comments, Senator Putnam?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for your time. And I also want to thank you, Mr. Chair, for co-authoring the bill, and Senator Rest as well for co-authoring, and Senators Miller and Dibble as well for signing on board. I appreciate y'all.
Very good. Thank you very much. And with that, Senate File 132 shall be laid on the table. Okay. Very good. Before we go to our last bill, our committee legislative assistant has a guest in the room this morning. Would you like to introduce him, Kevin?
Yes, my father's here. He's sitting in the tan coat over there. He's visiting from Pennsylvania, so if you see him, say hello and welcome him.
Welcome, Mr. Montresor. Glad to see you. With that, I will turn the gavel over to Senator Drazkowski and for Senate File 339.
Senator Weber, we have Senate File 339 before us. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate File 339 deals with a provider credit for real estate for our in-home child care providers. And as you well know, we basically have two types of child care in Minnesota. We have the center that maybe sometime is run by a school or a private entity, and we have in-home child care. Both of those types of child care are, number one, have a certain demand from the users of child care. And in my community, quite frankly, in-home child care is probably the main provider of child care. And when an individual decides to go into the child care business, they not only dedicate their time and efforts, but they dedicate their entire home. They have certain requirements that they need to meet, that they have specifications that they have to ensure are met in order to have a child care license to operate within their home. And as a result of that, you know, it's certainly not a business that is for everyone. And what this bill attempts to do is to provide some benefit to them for the commitment they make to include their home in their business. And as we go through the bill, the summary of it is that they would be allowed 50% of the net tax owed on their residential property after subtracting all other applicable credits. And this would be effective in the year 2026. And I think that as we go through, as you go through the bill, obviously it lists many of the elements that are involved in establishing the credit, how it's to be paid, and what have you. And so there's not a shift created, obviously, because this is a credit that will be reimbursed to the taxing entities. by the state of Minnesota. And I think in recent years, many of the child care pieces of legislation that have come through have tended to favor our centers more than they have our in-home daycare providers. And in fact, another related, but not an issue for this committee, are some of the rules and regulations that, quite frankly, are in place for them. But I do have, as a testifier today, Ms. Cindy Cunningham, who is a provider, who's been very involved in organizations as they work with the state to bring about a level of fairness to the in-home daycare provider system. And with that, Mr. Chair, I would like to turn the testifiers table over to her. She is going to be participating remotely as she has children in her home this morning.
Thank you, Senator Weber, and Ms. Cunningham, if you are there, please introduce yourself and proceed with your testimony. It looks like you may be muted, Ms. Cunningham, if you can hear us. Cannot hear you, Ms. Cunningham. We see you.
Can she hear us?
It's been said that you need to select the right microphone, Ms. Cunningham.
Working on it, sorry.
We hear you, Ms. Cunningham. Please proceed.
Oh, you do?
Thank you.
Okay. Yay, technology, sorry. Sometimes it's like a 3-year-old taking care of, right? So, okay, thank you very much. I am Cindy Cunningham. I have been a licensed child care provider in the state of Minnesota and St. Paul for 27 years. I am currently the public policy chair for the State Association for Licensed Family Child Care Lead and Care. I've been wandering around in the public policy space for about 14 years. Thank you, Senator Weber, for your continuing support for our programs and for Greater Minnesota. I am testifying on behalf of Lead and Care in support of Senate File 339, which creates this property tax for licensed family child care. Family child care is critical to the care of children and support of families in Minnesota. The industry is in crisis with the loss of programs over recent years. The loss is greatest in Minnesota. Licensing family child care is an unfunded delegated program from the state of Minnesota to the counties. The funding of the licensors, support staff, and all resources for programs is funded through county taxes, not the state. With this credit, programs will receive direct support from the state, which we currently do not receive in a similar manner, such as Senator Weber mentioned, many of the programs have most benefited centers. The state of Minnesota has provided relief. It's not working well enough to stabilize our industry. The numbers keep falling. This property tax credit by the state providing financial support specifically to licensed family child care gives tangible financial support. The credit will assist in lifting the financial burden of owning and managing these businesses in our homes, which benefit the communities that they live in. It also shows programs that the state of Minnesota supports family child care and wants our industry to be shored up and continue. With the loss of our programs, it has been a question that many have had is, does the state really want family child care? This bill shows the effort that it is going to support us. Thank you again, Senator Weber, for bringing this bill forward. We agree with all the points you made in your presentation about using our own homes. And hopefully it will make a new direction to stabilize our industry. Thank you for allowing me to attend remotely as the children are playing.
Thank you, Ms. Cunningham. I don't know if you're still there, Ms. Cunningham, but I've been in the legislature long enough to remember the term prickly grass. And I see you're smiling and laughing. Members, those of you that are newer, our family-run daycares have been overrun by government regulation, as both Senator Weber and Ms. Cunningham have been talking about. But I remember the statement that really sums it all up from the flurry of activity of regulation we've had in our recent past was the term prickly grass, where the complaint to government that was actually being heard by government was the grass is too prickly for the kids to walk on. And so that's kind of what we're dealing with and indicative of the struggles that the family daycares have. So thank you, Ms. Cunningham. Any questions for Ms. Cunningham, members? Thank you. Have a good day, Ms. Cunningham.
I will, thank you.
Senator Weber, do you have further discussion, or would you like to take questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would simply mention, in my home county, Rock County is a county of 9,000 plus people. A few years ago, we had 50-some in-home daycare providers. We're now down to a little over 30. Recently, we had an individual who was running in-home childcare, was full, had her maximum number of kids. Inspector came right over the lunch hour. Now, refrigerators are supposed to be kept at 36 degrees, no more, no less. When you have lunch hour, what do you do when you have a table full of kids? You open the door, get the bottle of milk, open the door, put it back, open the door to get this, to get that. And during that time, that temperature might fluctuate a couple of degrees, which it did. At the precise time the inspector was there. So what happened? The daycare provider gets written up. She finally said, I've had enough. This isn't worth it anymore with this kind of nitpicking that goes on within the system. She gave her families the required 2 or 3 week notice, and she was out of the business, and there were another 12 slots of childcare that went away. So at least this is one way that we can help to start financially compensate our in-home daycare providers. And so that would be my final comment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Weber. Any questions? Senator Putnam and then Hushel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Weber, for bringing this bill. You know, obviously our focus in this committee is on taxation and on those economic pressures in particular that are facing some of our child care providers. And I can say I've been working very closely with the United Way of Central Minnesota, and I'm blaming them for the fact that this number is inexact, but my understanding is close to 60% of the in-home daycare providers in central Minnesota have gone out of business in the last 5 years. So it's a profound crisis, and as you know as well as I do, centers also struggle in greater Minnesota because of the distance people got to drive. So a combination of these economic and social and cultural pressures on in-home daycare providers, combined with the already profound economic challenges for centers, creates a kind of maelstrom of the absence of childcare for people who live in greater Minnesota, which, as we all know, has tremendous impacts on our workforce and livability and quality of life. So I want to thank you for bringing up this bill and also ask you if you'll let me sign on as well. Certainly.
Thank you, Senator Putnam. Senator Hushel.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Senator Weber, for bringing this as well. I've been making childcare an issue that I am working on since I got elected, because to me, what we're finding more and more is that there are these community challenges, and Senator Putnam sort of alluded to this, where we can no longer just let it be. We have to get involved and find ways to make sure that we're supporting childcare from family to center to nonprofits, all the above. And there's not one silver bullet. I have an affordability bill. We've tried the child care tax credit idea in this committee that would go beyond the child tax credit, not to be confused between the two. And I've looked at ideas like allowing dual families to hire a nanny, because right now that's not allowed in the state of Minnesota. So I guess my point is, I think it's great that we are looking at solutions to the childcare challenges in multiple ways, because I think that's what it's really going to take. And I had not frankly thought of this idea that you're bringing forward of just simply providing property tax relief to those, to incentivize them to continue to provide family childcare. And I think you're exactly right, that in rural communities in greater Minnesota especially, this is really a way for us to say to those family providers, hey, we appreciate what you're doing, we value what you're doing, and we want, as a government, to incentivize you to keep doing it. And the simplest way to do that, rather than creating a new grant program or a new bureaucracy to do it, is to simply say, we're gonna provide you a tax credit. So I really love the idea. I would also love to sign on if you'll have me and help try to push this, this session. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Hochschild. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Senator Weber, thank you for addressing this very critical issue. I do have one question, well, one comment and then one question. The overregulation is totally unacceptable. Fortunately, in the last few years, we did pass the fix-it ticket, so that when there's some little thing like that refrigerator maybe being off a degree or two, it's a fix-it ticket instead of being written up and needing to tape it on the front door and all of those ridiculous things. So I'm glad we're making some headway there. I hope we can help make sure that it is affordable for in-home child care providers to stay home and continue to provide that important service. I do have one question though, because in my understanding, is this is it a property tax credit? And how would that affect the surrounding properties? Or do we know?
Well,
Senator Weber.
Mr. Chair, Senator Nelson, it's a credit, so it will be, the credit will be paid by the state of Minnesota, so it will not shift property tax onto anyone else.
Thank you. I think that's a very important distinction. Thank you.
Other questions, members? Thank you for your discussion. Just one comment. My thoughts align with Senator Hochschild on this. Members, government has created this issue largely, and I don't think that's really been disputed. And, you know, as we think about this as a legislature, what are our options? And I concur with Senator Hochschild. I wish I would have thought of this approach, Senator Weber, and it's a great bill. And it's a solution, and it's a solution that's maybe politically palatable. The other approach we could do is go back and repeal a bunch of the administrative rules and laws that are confounding and confining our home daycares. But to develop and bring forward the political courage to do that doesn't seem to happen around here real often. So we're looking for other solutions like this, and Senator Weber, you have found one. Senator Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In 2017, I became the chair of the Agriculture, Housing, and Rural Initiative Policy Committee. And we proceeded, even though we were simply an ag committee, I held 5 public hearings across the state of Minnesota, from Wilmer to Wabasha to Bemidji to Hibbing and in St. Paul. And quite frankly, the issue of overregulation doesn't only exist with our in-home child cares, it exists with our centers as well. That's what makes it so difficult for centers in greater Minnesota to actually get developed and be affordable to the people who need to use them. And people say, well, they can go ahead and they can apply for the child care assistance that's available. As we look at the future of our budget in Minnesota, that may or may not be available, quite frankly. And this idea that we can keep spending more money in order to fix the overregulation problem, I believe, has to come to an end. Now, I think in this particular instance, we have an immediacy to the problem that we need to address. But in the long term, if we are going to have childcare available for our working families, then we have to address the issue of overregulation. Today, in 2017-18, when I held those public hearings, I knew who I could contact within the HHS department to talk about this issue. today, I don't even know who's there. You have a changeover, you're making progress, they're starting to understand, and then they leave, and someone else takes over. And quite frankly, someone within the industry told me that they had approached the state regarding some of these issues, and they said, well, you're just gonna have to figure it out. They aren't even willing to work to solve the problems they're creating. And so, and I recognize that's beyond the scope of this committee, but I've got a couple ideas for other bills that on this particular issue. And I hope that at least in this small way, we can provide some assistance and some incentive to keep as many people into the business as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Weber. Thank you, members, for the discussion. With that, Senate File 339 is laid over. Members, we have come to the end of our agenda. Just a reminder, we're meeting 3 times again next week on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, beginning at 8:30 sharp. And please look for notices going out today about the contents of those meetings next week. Other announcements, Senator Weber.
Thank you. Senator Rest will be chairing next week. Also, if any of you have been notified on the committee that have bills that are going to be heard next week, make sure you get your bill hearing requests put in. And so right now, we have a number of bills that have been introduced, but they follow sort of a subject theme that we're going to try and hear them all at one particular time. If you have other individual bills that you are going to introduce, make sure that upon introduction, that bill hearing request gets to the committee administrator right away. That's all I have to say, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Weber. Thank you, members. And with that, the meeting is adjourned.